My hands won't stop shaking even now, 3 years after I turned in my resignation to the Canadian Parks Service. I'm writing this from my apartment in Toronto, where the closest thing to wilderness is the potted fern dying on my balcony. My therapist says writing it down might help. I don't think anything will help, but I'm trying anyway. I was a backcountry ranger in Algonquin Provincial Park for 7 years before it happened. Good job, decent pay. I loved being alone in the woods, checking on remote campsites, maintaining trails that most people would never hike. The solitude was the whole point. Or so I thought, until I learned that I was never actually alone. It started in late September, that brief window after the summer tourists cleared out, but before the winter made the backcountry impassable. I was doing a 2-week rotation at the northern station, a small cabin about 40 kilometers from the nearest road. Just me, my supplies, and a radio that crackled with static more often than voices. The first 3 days were routine. I hiked the trails, cleared some deadfall, checked the bear canisters at the designated camping spots. Normal stuff. But on the 4th morning, I found the arrangement. Someone had built a structure about 20 meters from my cabin. Called it a structure, really it was just sticks. Hundreds of thin branches, each about as long as my forearm, driven into the ground in a perfect circle. Each stick was sharpened to a point and angled inward, creating this skeletal dome that was maybe 2 meters across. Inside the circle was a dead squirrel, positioned on its back, legs spread like it was being displayed. I stood there staring at it for a long time. The squirrel hadn't been torn apart by a predator. Its body was intact except for its eyes, which had been carefully removed. The empty sockets stared up at the canopy. Hikers, I told myself. Some kids playing a prank. Except the nearest trail was 5 kilometers away, and nobody had signed the logbook at the station. Nobody was supposed to be out here. I radioed it in. My supervisor, Dale, sounded unconcerned. Probably some survivalist type. You know how they get. Thinks he's one with nature or whatever. Just take it down and keep an eye out. So I did. I kicked apart the circle of sticks and buried the squirrel. Problem solved. Except the next morning, there were 3 circles. Same design, same precise construction. One was 30 meters east of the cabin, another 40 meters west, and the third was directly behind my outhouse. Each contained an animal, another squirrel, a chipmunk, and something I couldn't identify because it had been skinned. My hands were shaking when I radioed Dale again. "How far apart are they?" he asked. "It's like they're forming a perimeter around the cabin." Silence on the other end. Then, "You want me to send someone up?" I almost said yes. Almost. But I'd been doing this job for 7 years. I wasn't going to get spooked by some weird bushcraft project. "No, I'll handle it. Just wanted to document it. Keep your bear spray handy. And Marcus, don't engage if you see anyone. Just observe and report." I destroyed the 3 circles, burned the sticks this time, scattered the ashes. Whatever message this person was trying to send, I was done receiving it. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside the cabin made me flinch. Wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. An owl's call became human laughter. I lay in my bunk with my flashlight in one hand and my bear spray in the other, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A rhythmic tapping sound, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere outside. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the roof. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. The September air was cold enough to see my breath. I swept the beam across the cabin's roof and saw nothing. But when I lowered the light, I saw what was making the sound. Hanging from the eaves were dozens of objects, suspended on fishing lines so fine I could barely see it. They swayed in the breeze, tapping against the cabin's log walls. Finger bones. Human finger bones, yellowed with age, each one dangling at eye level like a macabre wind chime. I counted 23 before my nerve broke and I ran back inside. I locked the door, dragged my footlocker against it, and sat in the corner with my radio. Dale, you there? I need immediate extraction. There's human remains here. Bones. I need police. Marcus, slow down. What bones? I told him. All of it. The circles, the animals, now the bones hanging from my roof. My voice was climbing higher, panic making it hard to breathe. Okay, listen to me. I'm sending a helicopter at first light. That's 4 hours. Can you hold on for 4 hours? What if he comes inside? You have your spray. You have a knife. You're going to be fine. Stay on the radio with me. But I couldn't stay on the radio, because that's when I heard the singing. It was coming from the woods, a woman's voice, high and clear and completely wrong for 3:30 in the morning in the middle of nowhere. She was singing something in French, a lullaby maybe, and it was getting closer. Marcus, what's happening? I couldn't answer. I was frozen, listening to that voice circle the cabin. She completed one full rotation, her song never faltering, and then she stopped directly in front of my door. The singing cut off. Silence. Then she spoke, and her voice was right against the wood, like her mouth was pressed to the crack in the doorframe. I know you're awake, Marcus. My blood turned to ice. She knew my name. I've been watching you for so long. Every rotation, every season. You never see me, but I'm always there, in the trees, in the shadows, watching you sleep. Who are you? I managed to whisper. She laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. I'm the last ranger who was posted here. That was, 13 years ago now? Hard to keep track. Time moves differently out here when you stop eating, stop sleeping, when you finally understand what the forest wants. The forest doesn't want anything. You're sick. You need help. The forest wants witnesses, Marcus. It wants people who will see, really see. And you're going to see. I'm going to show you. I heard her moving away from the door, heard her walking around the cabin, humming that lullaby. Then I heard scraping sounds on the roof. She was climbing up there. I grabbed my pack, my radio, my flashlight. I wasn't waiting for dawn. I wasn't waiting for the helicopter. I was leaving right now, even if it meant hiking 40 kilometers in the dark. But when I pulled my footlocker away from the door and reached for the handle, I stopped. Something was sliding under the door. A piece of paper. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what it said, but my hand moved anyway, picking it up, unfolding it. It was a photograph. Old, faded, but clear enough. It showed the cabin, my cabin, and sitting on the front steps was a woman in a ranger's uniform. She was smiling at the camera, looking healthy and normal and completely sane. Behind her, barely visible in the window, was a face. Pale, gaunt, pressed against the glass from inside the cabin, watching her. I turned the photo over, written on the back in neat handwriting. This is what I looked like before I saw her. You're seeing me now, which means soon someone else will see you. I threw the door open and ran. I don't remember much of that hike. I remember falling, I remember my flashlight dying, I remember running through absolute darkness, branches tearing at my face, roots trying to trip me, and I remember hearing her behind me, singing that lullaby, always the same distance away no matter how fast I ran. She followed me for 7 hours, only stopped when I finally stumbled onto the access road and saw headlights coming toward me. Dale found me collapsed in the middle of the gravel road, bloody and hypothermic. They took me to the hospital in Huntsville, kept me there for 3 days. The police investigated. They found the circles I'd destroyed, except now there were dozens of them spreading out from the cabin in geometric patterns. They found the bones hanging from the roof. DNA testing confirmed they were human, from at least 6 different individuals, some dating back decades. But they never found her. They searched for 2 weeks, brought in dogs and thermal imaging and helicopters. Nothing. The cabin was demolished. That whole section of the park was closed indefinitely. And I quit. But here's the thing they never put in any of the reports. Here's the thing I've never told anyone, not even my therapist. When the police showed me the photograph I dropped during my escape, asking if I could identify the woman, I looked at it carefully in good light for the first time. The face in the window behind the ranger wasn't a woman. It was me. Same face, same features, but wrong somehow. The eyes were too wide. The mouth was stretched in a smile that showed too many teeth. I've been seeing that face lately, not in photographs, in reflections. Standing behind me in windows, watching from mirrors, always the same distance away no matter how quickly I turn around. And sometimes, late at night in my Toronto apartment, 13 stories up with my door triple locked, I hear singing. That same French lullaby. Getting closer. I don't talk about what happened in the Białowieża forest anymore. Most people in my village know better than to ask. The ones who remember, who were there, they understand that some things are better left buried under snow and new growth. But my daughter is getting older now, asking questions about why we left Poland when she was a baby, why we never visit her grandmother's grave, why I wake up screaming about chainsaws. My wife says I need to tell the story, get it out. Maybe then I'll stop checking the locks 6 times every night, stop searching our apartment for wood shavings that aren't there. So here it is, what happened during the cutting season of 2006. I was a leśniczy, forest inspector, in the Białowieża, the last primeval forest in Europe. Ancient oaks and hornbeams that have stood since before Warsaw had a name. My job was to mark the old and sick trees for harvest, protect the young growth, and keep the commercial logging crews honest. That last part was always difficult. The logging companies wanted profit. They didn't care about regulations, about protected areas, about the forest's future. They cut where they wanted, when they wanted, and paid off the right people to look the other way. Men like me, the ones who actually tried to stop them, we weren't popular. My partner was Jacek, good man. Young, idealistic, still believed the system could work if enough people stood up. I was older, more cynical, but I liked his energy. We made a decent team. It was October when we started noticing the illegal cutting sites. Old-growth oaks, minimum 200 years old, being taken from protected zones. The stumps were fresh, sawdust still bright and fragrant. Someone was operating at night, cutting and hauling before anyone could catch them. We reported it. Of course we reported it. The authorities nodded and smiled and did absolutely nothing. So Jacek and I decided to catch them ourselves. We'd camp in the forest, wait until we heard chainsaws, and document everything. Photos, coordinates, license plates. Build a case they couldn't ignore. We set up our camp near one of the recent cutting sites. Small tent, camera equipment, thermos of coffee. We waited. 3 nights of nothing, just forest sounds, owls, the occasional deer. Jacek was getting discouraged, talking about giving up. But I had this feeling, this itch at the back of my neck that said something was wrong in the forest. On the fourth night, we heard it. Chainsaws. Multiple ones, maybe 3 or 4, echoing through the trees. But the sound was wrong. Too many saws running at once for a normal operation, and they were cutting fast. No pause between trees falling. One after another, timber crashing to the forest floor every few minutes. "Got them," Jacek whispered, grabbing the camera. We moved toward the sound, using our flashlights sparingly, trying to stay quiet. The chainsaw noise got louder, closer. I could smell sawdust and 2-stroke exhaust. We were almost on top of them. That's when we reached the clearing. It wasn't a clearing before. It had been dense forest, old growth, protected territory. Now it was a wasteland. 30, maybe 40 trees down, massive oaks and hornbeams reduced to stumps and slash piles. And working among the fallen giants were the loggers. There were 8 of them that I could see, all wearing balaclavas, even though it was October and not that cold. They moved with this mechanical efficiency, no wasted motion, chainsaws screaming as they sectioned the trunks into lengths a truck could carry. But the trucks were wrong. They were old Soviet military models, ZIL 131s, painted in faded forest camouflage. No company markings, no license plates. And they weren't just loading logs. They were loading them in specific patterns, stacking them in geometric arrangements that made my eyes hurt to look at. "What the fuck?" Jacek whispered. One of the loggers stopped cutting, turned his head toward us even though we were 50 meters away and hidden in shadow. His balaclava reflected the moonlight, and I could see his eyes through the holes. They were black, completely black, no whites at all. He raised his hand and pointed directly at us. All 8 loggers stopped working, turned to face our position, and then in perfect unison, they started walking toward us. We ran. I'm not proud of it. Should have stood our ground, documented everything, been the witnesses we'd promised to be. But those eyes, those black, empty eyes, some instinct older than thought told me to run, and I listened. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, roots trying to trip us. Behind us, I could hear them following. Not running, walking. That same mechanical efficiency, never faster, never slower, just steadily closing the distance. The chainsaws were still running. They'd brought them. I could hear the engines revving, could smell the exhaust getting closer. Jacek was faster than me, younger legs. He pulled ahead, glancing back to make sure I was keeping up. That's when I saw the logger step out from behind a tree directly in front of him. I don't know how he got there. He'd been behind us, but now he was ahead, and his chainsaw was raised, and Jacek was running too fast to stop. The blade caught him across the chest. I heard Jacek scream, saw him go down. The logger stood over him, chainsaw idling, watching my partner writhe on the ground. Then he looked at me. I had a choice. Go back for Jacek, probably die with him. Or run, survive, live with the guilt. I ran. I ran until I couldn't hear the chainsaws anymore, until my lungs were burning and my legs gave out, collapsed against a tree and vomited, then radioed for help. The police found Jacek 6 hours later, what was left of him. They said it looked like an industrial accident, that he must have surprised some illegal loggers and got caught in their equipment. They investigated for 3 days, found nothing, and closed the case. But I knew. I'd seen those eyes, seen the way they moved. That wasn't human. That was something else, something that had been in the forest so long it had forgotten how to be human. I started investigating on my own, called in sick to work, spent my days in the library and archives, digging through old records. Turned out there'd been stories about night loggers in the Białowieża for decades, maybe centuries. Crews that operated at dark, took only the oldest trees, left no trace except the stumps. The earliest documented case I found was 1893. Forest inspector named Kowalski reported seeing men who walked like puppets cutting trees by moonlight. He went to investigate. They found him a week later, fed into a sawmill feet first. 1923, a timber merchant tried to track the night loggers back to their mill. Never returned. His truck was found abandoned, back seat filled with sawdust and what the police report delicately called organic matter. 1956, Soviet Forestry Service sent a military squad to arrest the night loggers. All 12 soldiers disappeared. One of them was found 3 years later, or part of him anyway. His skull had been hollowed out and filled with wood shavings. The pattern was clear. Every 20-30 years, someone tried to stop them, and every time, those people ended up as fertilizer in the forest floor. I should have stopped investigating, should have left it alone, but Jacek had been my friend, and I owed him more than just running away. So I went back. Not to the clearing where Jacek died, that was too obvious, but I started mapping out the areas where old growth had been illegally cut over the past decade, plotted them on a map, looking for patterns. And I found one. The cuts formed a shape. When you connected all the sites, they outlined something enormous, something that covered nearly a quarter of the forest. It looked like a tree, a massive tree, with trunk and branches and even individual leaves marked by single old-growth specimens. They weren't stealing the timber, they were harvesting specific trees in a specific pattern. They were drawing something. I showed my research to the head forester, a man named Ostrovsky, who'd been working in the Bielorussia for 40 years. He looked at my map for a long time, his face getting paler and paler. "Burn this," he finally said. "What?" "Burn it. Destroy your notes. Forget you ever saw this pattern, and for God's sakes, stop investigating." "They killed Jacek. I can't just—" "They've killed a lot of people over the years, but the forest is still here. The old trees are still standing. That's the bargain." "What bargain?" Ostrovsky leaned back in his chair, looked at me with tired eyes. "There are older things than trees in this forest. Older than Poland, older than the Slavs, maybe older than humans. They were here first. The forest is theirs. We're just tolerated. As long as we don't cut too much, don't push too far. But every few decades, someone gets greedy, starts clear-cutting, starts threatening the forest itself. And that's when they appear, the night loggers." "That's insane." "Is it? You've seen them. Tell me they're human." I couldn't. "They take specific trees," Ostrovsky continued. "Ancient ones, the ones that hold the deepest roots, connect the broadest canopy. They section them in specific ways, remove them in specific patterns. And when they're done, the forest balances. The remaining trees grow stronger, new growth appears in places it shouldn't. The forest heals itself. And the people who interfere become part of the forest, literally. I've found bones mixed into tree roots before, skulls grown into trunks. The forest takes what it's owed." "So what, we just let them murder people?" "We stop trying to control what we don't understand. We do our jobs, protect what we can, and leave the old growth alone. That's how we survive." I didn't believe him, not really, but I also didn't have any better answers. And I was tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of checking over my shoulder, of hearing chainsaws in my nightmares. So I stopped investigating, went back to my regular duties, marked the trees we were allowed to mark, filed my reports, and tried to forget about the night loggers. For 3 months, everything was normal. The illegal cutting stopped. The protected zones remained untouched. I started to think maybe it was over. Then I found the message. It was carved into a tree at one of my regular checkpoint sites. Fresh cuts, still weeping sap. 5 words in Polish. Stop looking or join him. Below the words was a photograph nailed to the tree with a railroad spike. It showed Jacek, or what had been done to him. I won't describe it. Can't describe it. Some images burn themselves into your brain and no amount of time or distance makes them fade. I pulled the photo down, burned it, and made arrangements to leave Poland. We immigrated to Canada 3 months later. My wife thought it was for better opportunities. I let her believe that, better than telling her the truth, that I was running from something that had claimed the forest as its own and didn't appreciate witnesses. But here's the thing I haven't told anyone, not even my wife, the thing that keeps me up at night, checking our apartment for signs I know are impossible in a concrete building in Toronto. Last month, my daughter brought home a school project. She'd pressed leaves between sheets of wax paper, identifying different tree species: oak, maple, birch. And there, among the Canadian varieties, was a leaf I recognized: hornbeam, from the Białowieża forest, 2,000 miles away. I asked her where she got it. She said a nice man gave it to her at the park, a tall man wearing work clothes and a face covering because of allergies. He told her to give it to her father, told her to tell me they're still watching. I burned the leaf, but it's too late now. They know where I am. And sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, I hear it, faint but unmistakable, the distant sound of chainsaws getting closer. I need to start by saying I don't work for the National Park Service anymore. Quit 3 years ago, right after the incident. They were happy to let me go, gave me a full pension, signed my NDA without any fuss, made the whole thing disappear into their classified files. But the NDA expired last month, and my daughter just got accepted to forestry school. Says she wants to be a ranger like her old man. So I'm writing this down. Not for publication, not for some podcast, just so there's a record somewhere. So if something happens to her out there, maybe someone will understand. It happened in Olympic National Park, Washington State. I was a wilderness ranger, which meant I spent weeks at a time in the backcountry, maintaining trails, monitoring wildlife, making sure hikers didn't do anything stupid. It was good work, quiet, the kind of job where you could go days without seeing another human being. That was usually a feature, until it became a problem. I was on routine patrol, checking one of the remote trail shelters on the western edge of the park. It was early spring, snow still heavy at elevation, not many hikers out yet. The shelter was a simple 3-sided structure, just enough to keep the rain off if you got caught in a storm. When I got there, I found a backpack. That wasn't unusual. People left gear behind all the time, forgot a stuff sack, dropped a water bottle, whatever. But this pack was expensive, technical gear, and it was sitting right in the middle of the shelter floor, not pushed into a corner or hung on a nail like something you'd leave intentionally. I opened it up to look for ID. The pack was full: sleeping bag, tent, food for at least a week, fuel canisters, first aid kit, everything you'd need for an extended backcountry trip. Someone had just walked away from it. I found a wallet. Driver's license showed a man named David Chen, 34, from Portland. I radioed it in, gave them the name and description. "That's the third one this year," my supervisor said. Third what? Missing hiker in that sector. We found gear from 2 others back in January and February. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just abandoned equipment. Animal attack? That's what we thought at first, but there's no blood, no torn fabric. These people just dropped their gear and wandered off. Into the snow? They'd be dead in hours. Yeah, probably, but we haven't found any bodies, not one. They sent a search and rescue team to do a sweep of the area. 3 days of looking, dogs and helicopters and ground crews. Nothing. David Chen had vanished as completely as the 2 before him. The Park Service declared it an ongoing investigation and warned us to be extra vigilant, report anything unusual, don't patrol alone if possible. Standard protocols. But I kept thinking about that backpack, the way it had been positioned so carefully in the center of the shelter, not dropped or abandoned in a panic. Placed. Like an offering. I went back to that shelter 2 weeks later. Told myself I was just doing my regular rounds. But really, I wanted another look. Wanted to understand what I'd missed. The backpack was gone, seized as evidence. But there was something new. Carved into the wooden floor of the shelter, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a symbol. Circle with lines radiating out from the center like a sun, or like roots spreading underground. And beside it, pressed into the soft wood, was a handprint. It was too large to be human. The palm was easily twice the size of mine, and there were 6 fingers instead of 5. I took photos, sent them to my supervisor with a request for an anthropology consult. Maybe it was some indigenous marking we didn't know about. Maybe there was a logical explanation. The anthropology report came back 3 days later. No cultural significance identified. Recommend treating as modern vandalism or hoax. But I'd touched that handprint, felt how deep it was pressed into the wood. You couldn't fake that kind of pressure without tools, and there were no tool marks. Something with huge hands had pressed its palm into the shelter floor hard enough to leave an impression in solid timber. I should have requested reassignment. Should have told them I didn't feel safe in that sector anymore. But I was stubborn. Didn't want to admit I was spooked. So when they asked for a volunteer to do a week-long wildlife survey in that same area, I raised my hand. The survey route took me deep into old growth, places where the trees were so massive and so close together that noon felt like twilight. Beautiful in a way that made you understand why ancient peoples worshipped forests, but also oppressive, claustrophobic. On the 3rd day, I found the hollow. It was a massive cedar, had to be 800 years old, with a trunk diameter of maybe 4 meters. Lightning or disease had hollowed out its center, creating a cave-like space inside. Not unusual, old trees do that all the time, but this one had been modified. Someone had carved symbols all over the interior, that same sun root pattern I'd seen in the shelter, repeated hundreds of times, covering every surface. And the floor of the hollow was packed dirt, smooth and level like it had been used regularly. In the center was a pile of objects. Driver's licenses, 7 of them, including David Chen's. My hands were shaking as I photographed everything. 7 missing hikers, 7 licenses arranged in a careful circle, and around them, pressed into the dirt, were more of those handprints. Dozens of them, like something had been circling the pile over and over, wearing a path into the earth. I radioed in my coordinates and findings, told them to send everyone. This was a major crime scene. While I waited for backup, I examined the hollow more carefully. The symbols were carved deep, some of them worn smooth like they'd been there for years, maybe decades. And high up, near the opening, I found something else. Scratches, claw marks, running down the inside of the tree, as if someone had been trying to climb out, or had been dragged down. I heard movement behind me and spun around. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a man. At least, it had the shape of a man. Tall, maybe 7 feet, wearing what looked like ranger clothing. But wrong. The proportions were off, arms too long, legs bent at the wrong angle. And the hands. 6-fingered hands that hung past its knees. It was wearing a face. I know that sounds insane, but that's the only way to describe it. Like a mask, except the mask was made of skin and hair, and it moved when the thing underneath tilted its head. The face looked like David Chen. "Are you lost?" it asked. The voice was wrong too. Multiple voices overlapping, speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. I reached for my radio. It grabbed my wrist before I could key the mic. Its hand was cold, texture like wood bark, and those 6 fingers wrapped around my arm with crushing strength. "The forest takes what it needs," it said. "The old trees need deep roots. Deep roots need feeding." It started pulling me toward the hollow. I fought, kicked, managed to get my knife out and slashed at its arm. The blade cut through the ranger uniform and into the flesh beneath. Except it wasn't flesh. It was wood. Layers of wood and bark and something that looked like fungal threads, all woven together in a mockery of human anatomy. It didn't bleed. Just looked at the cut, then at me, with those borrowed eyes. "You're hollow inside," it said, "like the old trees. We can fix that." I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I stabbed it multiple times. I know it dragged me into the hollow. I know there were more of them, emerging from between the trees, all rearing faces I recognized from the missing person reports. And I know something inside that tree tried to fill me up. I woke up in a hospital in Port Angeles 5 days later. Search and rescue had found me unconscious at a trailhead parking lot, 60 miles from where I'd made my last radio call. I had dirt under my fingernails, bark embedded in my skin, and wood splinters driven so deep into my arms they had to surgically remove them. But I was alive. Hollow, but alive. The Park Service closed that entire sector, said there was dangerous mold growth in the old trees, potential for structural collapse. Anyone caught in the area would be prosecuted. They gave me my pension and a paper to sign. I signed. What else was I going to do? Tell people that something was living in the ancient cedars, wearing dead hikers like puppets? The thing is, I think it's been there for centuries, maybe longer. All those missing person cases in national parks, the ones that never get solved, how many of them ended up in hollows, fed to old trees that needed sustenance? How many of those faces were still walking around out there? I see them sometimes, in news footage of parks, in other people's vacation photos posted online. A hiker in the background, proportions slightly wrong, arms too long, face not quite right, wearing a ranger uniform. And that's why I'm writing this. That's why I'm begging my daughter not to take that forestry job, because the forests are old, older than us, and they're hungry. And some things that look human stopped being human a long time ago. But I don't think she'll listen. She has her mother's stubbornness. So I'll just have to hope that whatever's in those trees, whatever wears our faces and walks our trails, finds her too empty to bother with, like it found me. Hollow. I'm breaking operational security by writing this. If my former employers figure out who I am, there will be consequences. But I'm 73 years old with stage 4 lung cancer. They can't do anything worse to me than what's already happening. This is about what the Forest Service found in New Mexico in 1987, what we were told to burn, forget, and never speak about again. My name is William Cross. I was a fire management officer for the Santa Fe National Forest. My job was assessing burn zones after wildfires, determining what could be salvaged, what needed to be replanted. 30 years of walking through charred landscapes, breathing smoke, and watching forests die and regenerate. You see a lot in 30 years. Dead wildlife caught in the fire, sometimes human remains when hikers got trapped, archaeological sites exposed by the flames, ancient Pueblo ruins, petroglyphs, artifacts the native peoples left behind. But in August 1987, we found something none of our training prepared us for. The Dome Fire had burned 15,000 acres of mixed conifer forest. Not the worst I'd seen, but bad enough. My team went in 3 days after containment to do our initial assessment. The fire had been hot enough to vaporize vegetation, leave nothing but ash and exposed mineral soil. We were walking through what looked like a moonscape, gray powder, blackened tree skeletons, complete devastation. About 4 miles into the burn zone, we found the clearing. It was circular, maybe 30 meters across, and nothing had burned there. The grass was green, the wildflowers blooming. In the middle of thousands of acres of ash, there was this perfect circle of living vegetation. My team leader, a guy named Patterson, radioed it in immediately, asked for instructions. Weird stuff happened in fires sometimes. Wind patterns could create pockets that survived intact, but this was too perfect, too geometric. While we waited for a response, we examined the perimeter. The line between burned and unburned was knife-edge sharp. On one side, complete incineration. On the other, healthy growth. And in the center of the green circle was a structure. It looked like a cairn at first, stacked stones about waist high, but as we got closer, we realized the stones weren't stacked. They were fused together, melted like glass, formed into a hollow cylinder. Inside the cylinder was a body. Human, definitely human, but wrong in ways I'm still trying to articulate. The skeleton was intact, but the bones were crystalline, translucent like quartz, and they were arranged incorrectly. Too many ribs, vertebrae in the wrong order, a skull that had too many sutures. Patterson photographed everything while I examined the grass around the cairn. The roots went down maybe 6 inches before hitting something solid. I used my knife to dig, and about 8 inches down, I hit stone. Flat stone. Smooth, man-made. We'd found the roof of something buried. The Forest Service sent a full team 2 days later. Archaeologists, anthropologists, geologists, and about a dozen people in suits who wouldn't identify their agency. They cordoned off the entire area, brought in ground-penetrating radar, and started a controlled excavation. What they found underneath scared them so badly they stopped after 3 days and called in the military. I wasn't supposed to see the final report, but my clearance was still active from my time in the National Guard, and I knew people who owed me favors. I got 15 minutes with the file before they made me sign enough NDAs to gag a senator.
Here's what was under that clearing. A chamber, roughly 40 meters across, 8 meters deep, carved from solid bedrock. The walls were covered in writing, not English, not Spanish, not any native language the anthropologists recognized. Strange, angular script that seemed to shift when you looked at it directly. In the center of the chamber was a pit, 20 meters deep, perfectly circular, sides polished smooth. At the bottom were more bodies, 37 of them, all with those same crystalline bones, all arranged in concentric circles around a central point where something had been removed. The dirt showed scrape marks like someone had dug something up recently. Very recently. The dating was wrong too. The chamber was old, best guess was 12 to 15,000 years, but the bodies on the surface, the one in the cairn, that one couldn't be more than a few months old. The flesh was still desiccating. Someone had been using this site recently, leaving offerings or conducting rituals or something the anthropologists didn't have a framework to explain. The writing on the walls told a story once they finally found someone who could translate it. Took them 6 months and consultations with linguistic experts from 3 universities, but they pieced together something. It was a warning. The fire that burns inside will emerge. When the earth bleeds smoke, the old forms will walk. Do not let them leave. Do not let them reach the water. The chamber had been a prison, built by people who lived here before the ancestral Puebloans, before any culture we had historical record of. They'd imprisoned something, sealed it with those crystalline bodies, and left instructions carved in stone. And someone had broken the seal. The Forest Service wanted to document everything, preserve the site, study it properly, but the people in suits, and I'm 90% certain they were DOE or DOD, had different ideas. They burned it, used thermite charges to melt the chamber into slag, collapsed the pit, sealed it under tons of rubble. Then they set a controlled burn over the entire area, made it look like a natural hotspot from the original fire. When they were done, there was nothing left but vitrified rock and ash. Patterson tried to argue, said this was archaeological vandalism, that they were destroying irreplaceable historical data. They transferred him to Alaska 3 weeks later. Last I heard, he died in a climbing accident in 1989. The rest of us got the message. Forget what we saw, never speak about it.
The official report said we found some native graves disrupted by the fire, conducted respectful reburials, and moved on. But here's why I'm writing this now, why I'm breaking my silence even though I know what it might cost me. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a former colleague who still works for the Forest Service. There's been another fire in the Santa Fe National Forest, not a big one, maybe 2,000 acres, but they found something in the burn zone. A clearing that didn't burn, perfectly circular, with a cairn in the center, and inside the cairn, a body. Crystalline bones, arranged wrong. Whatever was in that chamber, whatever those ancient people imprisoned, it didn't die when the Forest Service melted the prison. It just moved. There are 17 national forests in New Mexico alone, hundreds across the western United States, millions of acres of empty land where fires burn every summer, exposing what's hidden beneath. How many more chambers are there? How many more prisons built by people who knew things we've forgotten? And how many have already been opened? I'm dying. My lungs are full of tumors, probably from all those years breathing smoke and ash. I've got maybe 6 months left, but I keep thinking about that warning carved in the chamber walls. Do not let them reach the water. There are 18 major reservoirs in New Mexico. They supply water to millions of people across 4 states. And last month there were reports of strange crystalline formations found in the filtration systems of the Cochiti Dam. Formations that looked almost biological, almost skeletal. The water department said it was just mineral buildup, nothing to worry about. But I've seen those formations before, and I know what they are. So I'm writing this, putting it out there. Maybe someone will listen. Maybe someone will look at the right satellite images, check the right geological surveys, and find the other chambers before more fires expose them. Or maybe I'm just a dying old man, scared of shadows and trying to make sense of something that doesn't have an explanation. But I've walked through burn zones for 30 years. I know what fire leaves behind. And I know the difference between ash and bone. The things in those chambers, they're not dead. They're dormant, waiting for the right conditions, the right fire, the right person to break the seal. And when they wake up, when they finally reach the water like that warning said they would, I don't think we're going to be ready. I don't think we can be ready. Because some things were buried for a reason. And we just keep digging them up.